May 5th, 1999, the big day. This was, I recently just had, like 6 months before, 8 months before, in September, the biggest musical event in my life, of course, meeting John. And over those next 6 months, as I mentioned back in part 2, I wrote some new tunes and practiced, trying to put together a set list of, wow, what could I possibly play? I had to think about old standards. Or fallbacks, maybe. Oh man, I should have dug up the set list. I do have a recording from some of this stuff. I'll get back to that. And what else was high on my, probably, oh yeah. Anyway. So over the next 6 months, I kind of just dialed up some tunes that I thought would make would be good for the show, and wrote a couple new ones. I had, like I mentioned before, Back to the Drawing Board, and On the Horizon. Oh, and SOS, yeah. Anyway, you've heard enough of those. So. Really excited. John shows up. We go down to the Espresso Garden about 5 o'clock and start setting up and just talking about what I was really excited about was we had made a plan to play through my tune Back to the Drawing Board, and we ran through it once or twice at a rehearsal. This was, I mean, after we were set up. So he had a rough idea of what was going to happen there, and I think we decided we could probably do a Gary Davis medley of some sort too, maybe Keep Your Lamps Trimmed and Burning or something like that. So we had this plan to at least attempt a couple of duets. I was pumped. And as you might know already, then kind of the story changed from elation to shock. And that was about 6:30. My phone rings and I get a call. It's my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law has just passed away. And she had just gotten home from work and found him on the kitchen floor. I didn't know what to do, what to say. You know, I'm sitting there with John, and he says, "Well, you just have to go." I said, "Yeah, I know." Anyway, it was very mixed emotions there. Well, no, they weren't mixed anymore. They were shock. So he says, "I'll just go ahead and do the show, and you go do what you have to do." And so I said, "Okay." So over the next few hours, we I won't go too much into the detail there, but got everybody settled. We didn't want to tell the kids that night, and they were at an open house at school. Anyway, I'll save the details of that story for another time. But to sum up the rest of that evening, all of a sudden about 9 o'clock, everything was settled, and there was really nothing for me to do. Nani wanted to stay there with her family, and everybody seemed fine. And I thought, I really feel like playing the guitar, and I think I'm just going to go back down to the Espresso Garden and see if they still have room for me. So, I went back, and John insisted then, or said, "Hey, do you want to get up and play?" And so I did. So I went through a set of. So he had kind of prepped himself at that point for a 2-set show, and had played some of his lighter stuff in the beginning, saving some of the heavier stuff for later, and which he ended up not really ever getting to. I got up and played a set, and I was really numb throughout most of it. I don't. There is an audio tape of it, and I haven't, or at least an audio recording of it floating around here someplace, and I might dig it up someday and listen to it. But and then I think we tried to get through the duets. Probably not. Anyway, the next day was a rough day, and this was the day of now the Montalvo show. Anyway, it sort of came together, and the show turned out to be fabulous, and I had time of my life. I mean, playing the guitar with John was, the best therapy I could have had for dealing with death in the family, probably right then. And so I do have audio of that show too. I'm thinking about, to go off on a tangent, how unusual. I do have recordings of like all the 8 or 9 Montalvo shows. I think there were 8 that I did over the years. And of course John's in 1999 was the first one. And I'm toying with the idea of at least assembling them all as a as a pack of live, the archives kind of thing. So anyway, I probably shouldn't have brought that up, but because if it doesn't happen, I'm okay. To get back to the story, concert was a blast. I mean, I was like on cloud nine for when it was over, and for the next couple of days, even though we're dealing with funeral arrangements. Well, we didn't really do a funeral, but the next day, Friday, to go a little bit more into my Leroy's story, my father-in-law, Friday on the local Hawaiian radio show, they announced that there would be a kind of a wake or a gathering for him at their house in Sunnyvale on Saturday. And he was pretty big in the Hawaiian community around here. And so on that Saturday, about 200 people showed up. And that was kind of cool. It was pretty therapeutic. The next day, Mother's Day, Sunday, which I guess would have been the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th maybe. Yeah, okay. Nani and I were back over there at her mom's house, and we spent most of the day there. And I picked up my father-in-law's guitar, this guitar, that I'd gotten for him a couple of years before. It's a Harati Takamine made koa for my Hawaiian father-in-law, and just started playing stuff, and pretty much all day. This is what evolved. So, I really felt this song just came out of the guitar, and I kind of didn't feel like I even had any control over it. It was a very strange feeling, and so that was I guess the genesis of my song Papa's Guitar, written on Papa's guitar, and that as time went on over the next couple of weeks, I remember thinking, I talked to John a little bit more, and I started thinking, I haven't made an album in 10 years, maybe so. I can't remember when Yesterday's News was, probably 1993, maybe 6 or 7 years. Anyway, and I thought, I've got these four original songs. I said, I gotta keep writing some more and put an album together. And then I thought, wait a minute, I've got a pile of songs from 1985, from the early 80s, that I've never recorded. And so thanks, Papa. So I started looking back at tunes, and again, all this was inspired because of what happened with John. And so I started looking back through some songs that I'd written a few years ago, and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. I should do this one and do this one, and had these things called 3 First Impressions. Anyway, I spent the next few months kind of honing some songs and recorded an album called On the Horizon, and recruited my friend Rich Olson to play a duet that we had worked on back in the early 80s. We'd done a little bit of performing, and had this piece that we did a lot of duets, and so Rico's Best Shot was one that I'd kind of composed for 2 guitars. We did versions of like Windy and Warm and other stuff. I mean, we made our own things like that. Anyway, so to get back to the story's now going to divert a little bit into another great thing about this was that the guys at Montalvo, Bruce Labadie, they were thrilled that we sold out the place and everybody was really happy and all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, hey, would you maybe we could think about doing this again next year or something. He goes, oh, that'd be great. Let's make a plan, but get somebody else now. I thought, get somebody else. I don't know anybody else. He said, you know, get somebody else, you know, share the stage, get some other big star. Well, I started thinking and racking my brain, thinking, well, who else would I want to play with? I mean, I've played with John Renbourn. It was like, I can die happy. So I started thinking of other guitar players that I might want to do this with, and I had no idea how to get a hold of any of them or what. And then I thought, you know what? The next person I would really like to play with is Al Stewart. That was my next biggest musical hero. I just loved his songs and the guitar parts in his songs and things like that. So I'll keep this part of the story short because I've told it in other places, I think. But Al grew up in kind of like the same early London days that John was there. Again, with people like Paul Simon, Bob Dylan, Bert Ganch, Davy Graham, Whiz Jones, who, well, anyway, I might get to more about Whiz later. Probably not. Anyhow, I just decided to just call Al's management and see if they'd think about doing something here. And so I call him up out of the blue, talked to Steve Chapman and said, hey, would Al be available to play a show at Montalvo where I'd be the opening act and he could then do a set and then, you know, I basically was just going to hire him to be the headliner. And Steve said, well, he thought, you know, I don't think so. Tell me more. Tell me a little bit more. I said, well, it's an old winery, and I know Al's kind of into wine, and that piqued his interest a little bit. And I said, and here's the history of the deal is I just did a show there recently with John Renbourn, and they wanted me to get somebody else to come in next year. And Steve said, you played with John Renbourn? I said, yeah. And we did a show together. We played some duets, and he said, I'll talk to Al and we'll get back to you. I thought, wow, that was another like just out of the blue thing, you know, getting blown off for the first time until you know, the credibility of performing with John opened this door. And next year I did the show with Al. I was scared to death. Same thing. I'd really never met him. We talked a few days before the concert. I'd been working on guitar arrangements of some of his songs that I knew he, like piano songs. Field of France was the main one, and a few others. And I was thinking, man, if I get to play along with Year of the Cat with Al, another musical highlight that I never would have dreamed of. That I never would have dreamt. Okay, I got to consult Al on my grammar here. Anyway. So the end of this part of the story is really that this turned into a whole series of concerts that I did at Montalvo for the next 6 or 7 years, and got to meet, I did one with Lawrence Juber, or actually multiple ones with Lawrence, who I met through Al because he was Al's guitar player for many years, and he knew that Al had done the Montalvo show with me, so and then Keola Beamer, and that's how Keola became a friend of mine too, really just, and the story on Keola really shortly is much the same. Hired him to do a workshop, and then we got to know each other, and you know, then we started playing together. It was fun. Okay, back to what else happened with John after that. So John, I didn't see him too much over the next couple of years, but he was here maybe once a year, and he invited me to come play whenever he was nearby. He did a show, I believe it was in Healdsburg. He was playing up there, and it was during the Healdsburg Guitar Show. And not too many people came because he wasn't part of the show. It was like at a theater, and they didn't do a very good job promoting it. So it was kind of weird, but it was still really fun because then we did have some duets worked out. We had worked out, we played Snap a Little Owl and Looper's Corner and the blues thing and anyway. So it was really fun to be able to play along with John doing those tunes. And you know, I guess I'm almost at the end of the story here because over the next few years we stayed in touch, and whenever he was here, I had him do a workshop. It was 2004, August of 2004. He was here and stayed with us and did a workshop here in my house, in the living room, just on the other side of the building here, and that was great. Luckily, I only have like a few seconds of video of that, but I was just watching it the other day because I thought, you know what? Man, the guy sat here in my living room and entertained and educated my students once again. What up? That was probably the last time I saw him. My friend Tom and I saw him play at the Little Fox Theater in Redwood City one time, and he pretty much stopped traveling and coming to the United States. The transatlantic flights had taken their toll on him about 6 or 7 years ago. And probably more. I don't think he's been here probably in 10 years, maybe 2005 or so, 5 or 6. And but I did invite him to do a few things. One thing I really regret now. He invited me multiple times. He said, "Neil, you got to come over to Scotland and come visit me in Hawick." I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I'll have to consult Tom, my Scottish consultant, and find out the pronunciation of some of the towns where he lived. And I was really still kind of had that on my agenda for sometime in the next couple of years. So obviously not going to happen now. But now 2 years ago, when we started our first international guitar camp, I thought, you know, how cool if I could get him to come over and be one of the guest teachers at camp. And he very politely said, you know, I just can't get on a plane and go that far anymore. I'm pretty much done coming to the United States. He did offer, though. He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do instead," because he got very heavily into composing. You know, he studied. He kind of studied composition in the early '80s and ended up getting a degree and even teaching. Teaching at Dartmoor, it was called, or something. Oh man, again, I should have consulted some notes. Oh well. And got very serious about his music in the last, at the time in his career when most people are resting on their laurels, putting out just later versions of the same stuff. He just never stopped progressing as a musician, and he was always fascinated by anybody he heard. He'd say, "Hey Neil, have you heard this?" And you know, he was a true Renaissance man, that's for sure. But he also just had a love for life and for people, and getting everything he could, absorbing everything he could from anybody around him. He was just a remarkable, you know, person with no ego, no pretenses. So now I remember the last time I spent significant time with him was at the end of the workshop here, and we got talking about Renaissance music and lutenists and stuff like that. And I said, you know who really inspired me, after I got out my Baroque lute at the time and showed him, you know, we talked a little bit about it. And I said, Julian Bream kind of introduced me to the lute, and that's what got me in about 1975. Went out and had one built and decided I'm going to play the lute. And my friend John Dimmick had introduced me to an older lutenist, Walter Gerwig, who was German and put out some albums in the 50s, maybe even 40s, and then into the 60s, I think. But and I believe he died in the mid 60s. But anyway, John and I got to talking about lutes, and he said, "Well, do you have anything of Walter's that I could listen to?" I said, "Oh, sure. I've got 4 or 5 albums down there." So we went down in my basement where the records are, and sat on the couch for an hour or so, just listening to Walter Gerwig, playing mostly Baroque stuff. And it wasn't just till the other day that I carefully listened to John's last album, Palermo Snow. And not carefully, but where I made a connection because it has some really cool stuff on it. So if you haven't heard Palermo Snow, I really suggest checking it out. Great variety of stuff. And as I'm listening through this, I hear this. I should have learned that before I went into this story. I didn't know the story was coming. But one of the really clear memories I have of that Walter Gerwig album was this beautiful, the sound that he got out of the lute playing that prelude by Bach, that is, I believe, from one of the cello suites. And John had this on his last album, Palermo Snow. And just the other day I remember that, wow, we specifically listened to that song and Gerwig's performance of it, and here's John playing Bach on the steel string guitar. Who'd have thunk? He had an earlier version of the Sarabande. I can't remember now exactly, but done on an electric guitar with vibrato on, or tremolo happening on it. Yeah, fades in and out. And I remember at the time thinking, this is really weird hearing Bach on the electric guitar. When I heard the prelude on the steel string guitar played by the master, I thought, you know, I get flack sometimes for playing classical stuff on the steel string guitar by, I don't even say it, never mind. Stay positive. And just hearing John play that stuff really kind of gives credibility to anybody playing it on the steel string guitar, I think. And I guess, anyway, I hope that little, that our encounter in the basement listening to Walter Gerwig play Bach maybe inspired John to someday record that same prelude. Now, he may have been playing it for years, I don't know, but just like to throw in my own little dreams and thoughts about it. I think that is all I have for now as far as how important John was to me. I don't really have a plan for wrapping this up, but I should probably play something. Let's check the tuning completely before I regret it. Everything a little high. Oh, let's wait for that big old bus to go by anyway. So this is where it all started. Lady Nothing's Toy Puff, or at least a kind of unpracticed version of it. You get the idea, though. I guess all I can really say, the last thing I can really think about with John is I can only thank him for what he did for my musical career, and I don't really want to even call it a career, but just my musical development and evolution. Would not have gotten anywhere near where it is and where it did and where it continues. I mean, even now, every time, sometimes I'm thinking about doing something, or if I feel myself getting lazy as a guitar player, it's I can look at a recent example of rededicating myself to learning Bathina. Could only have come about because of the inspiration that John brought to me. So I think that's it. We're all going to miss you, buddy.